Good morning and welcome to another episode of OT Investigates. In today's episode, we're going to be going through the first in a series of episodes on the new Last Alliance supplement, which I've had a crack at designing. Now, obviously hoping that G come out this themselves at some point, but clearly that's not going to be happening anytime soon. So in absence of that, I've had a go at designing it myself. This is going to be a 4-episode series. I'm just going to go through sort of the standard stuff you'd expect with Legendary Legions. So I've made a few profiles and then I've designed a few Legendary Legions. Now I'm going to hold back the details of the Legendary Legions for now. I can reveal there are 6 of them. There are 4 good ones and there are going to be 2 evil ones. And yeah, those have been introduced further down the line. But in today's episode, we'll be going through the new profiles that I've designed for the Last Alliance sourcebook. There are going to be 10 in total. You can probably guess already what a couple of them are going to be, but there are also some of them that I hope might be a little bit of a surprise. So the first one we're going to look at, and obviously I have to give a bit of context for what these are actually going to be and what context they fit into in the rest of the supplement, but this is the first one. It is Oropher, Lord of the Sylvan Elves. Oropher basically ruled over something called the Greenwood, which was the precursor to Mirkwood and to what later become Thranduil's Halls. He's actually Thranduil's dad. And you can probably spot that in sort of the similarity in the stat line. So actually, very similar stat line to base Thranduil. He loses out a couple point of fate, which also makes him that a little bit cheaper. And he is a hero of legend in this one. He's basically the sort of lord of the host of the Sylvan Elves that is sent out, that goes out to fight Sauron, and later meets sort of quite a nasty end, but we'll come on to that more in the Legendary Legions. Basically their theme is that they are very focused on like the woods and they're at one with nature, so they're a bit more, the Sylvan Elves are a bit more basic than the Noldoran Elves. They're more focused on nature and they're less armoured, less interested in warfare, more interested in being at one with nature. So that's reflected in the royal Sylvan lineage, which basically means whenever they're in contact with a piece of woodland terrain, they're going to get Stalk Unseen and resistant to magic. They also come with Woodland Creature and Fleetfoot, so the idea is that they can go through those woodlands very quickly. He'll get the Circlet of Kings, Horse and Armour, similar to Thranduil. Obviously, he's the king at this point, so he'll be the one with the Circlet of Kings. Now, there was something that, maybe this is spoilers for a later Legendary Legion, but something called the Sylvan Pride. And basically this means that Oropher models in his army with the Greenwood keyword, same one as him, cannot benefit the standfast or heroic actions of the Rivendell model. Basically there was just a distrust of the Sylvan Elves of the Noldor, so that's Rivendell, Gil-galad, people like that, and they were just distrustful of them, so they're not going to benefit from those heroic actions or the standfast of those. Moving on, so we've got young version of Thranduil, who loses out on a few stats compared to his later version, so 1 less attack, 1 less wound, 1 less might, will and fate. He obviously comes in a fair bit cheaper. He can take horse, armour and elfin bow. He also keeps his Blade Lord rule and the 2 previous rules that went over with Oropher. So yeah, he's just designed to be sort of a reasonably heavy hitter, but a little bit cheaper, more affordable in the army. Maybe he's a little bit underpowered, but I feel like he is actually quite good where he is at the moment. Amdir. So the other section of the Sylvan Elves are actually based out of Lorien before Galadriel and Celeborn made their home there. He comes base with armour and an elven sword, and he can take an elven bow, and he can again have a horse. Similar, he was part of the Sylvan Elves, so he'll have the same rules as the Sylvan Lineage and Sylvan Pride. However, because he is the King of Lorien, I've kind of tried to reflect that with some similarities to Celeborn's rules, so he gets the increased standfast, and also rather than giving the +1 courage rule for +1 point, I've just given him a bit of a buff by saying all the models in his warband will get bodyguard to him. Now, he is a little bit flimsy, so he may not be the best hero to bodyguard to, but yeah, he's again sort of the ruler of Lorien, and unfortunately he does die, so again he's going to come in with that 1 fate. Now, this is probably the most anticipated profile of the lot, and I've done my best to try and make it sort of similar to the other Numenor profiles while giving it sort of a little bit extra as for a reason to run him. So he actually is pretty much identical to Isildur in terms of his stats. He can also take a horse. He comes base with a shield, so he is slightly cheaper, and he gets the same Blood of Numenor rule that Isildur does. His special rule is going to be a fearless commander, so basically he was a frequent commander of the armies and actually came to Isildur's aid a couple of times, and to try and reflect that as best I can, if he's in combat he will count as a banner, and all models within 3 inches can reroll failed courage tests. If your army breaks, that will extend to 6 inches, and again they can reroll failed courage tests. Really nice keeping your army on the battlefield. So I think he serves a bit of a different role to the other 2 big hitters in Elendil and Isildur, but yeah, Maybe not the most exciting profile in the world, but part of the reason I'll reflect on this again later is that not a whole lot's actually written about a lot of the characters I'm going into here, so I've had to do a bit of imagining, and I didn't want to create anything that, you know, went against previous themes and things like that was a bit too out there, so hopefully all these make sense. Now, these profiles I'm going to run through now are quite niche and are only usable in very specific scenarios. These three are going to be the Sons of Isildur. They're broadly based on the Numenor Captain profile, except I've given them the +1 strength bonus, which I think maybe Numenor Captains could have, but yeah, that's one for another day. They come in at 80 points, they're all going to come in at 80 points, and they'll all have their own individual special rule. So, Ciryon, who I think was his oldest son, is sort of one of the ones who's reckless, and he is actually the one who dies first at the disaster of Gladden Fields. His rule is he must charge if he's able to. However, on a turn in which he charges, he can reroll all to wound rolls in the following combat phase. So he just gets a nice little buff for charging into combat, maybe being a little bit reckless. As you can see there at the bottom, there's Son of Isildur, so they can only be taken in if the only other hero models in the army are Isildur or a Son of Isildur. So it's designed to be based around a sort of themey moan at the disaster at Gladden Fields. Next one is Aratan, which I think was his middle son, not entirely sure, but I think it was his middle son. Again, identical stat line, they keep the Blood of Numenor rule, and his rule is going to be Fierce Loyalty. So he's basically, he was wounded trying to come to the aid of Ciryon, so I've given him a rule called Fierce Loyalty. If any other hero model of the army is trapped, he can call heroic combat for free. So that's already, there's precedent for that rule already, and yeah, it's designed to say that, you know, if a hero is being attacked and is being overwhelmed, he will try to come to their aid as best he can. Final one is Elendur, and he's the one who tells Isildur to flee when they realise the battle is lost and that they need to try and preserve and keep the ring safe and try and keep Isildur safe if they can. So his rule is going to be Wise Counsel. Now, I toyed around with this one a lot, trying to keep it balanced, because I did realise giving out free might be quite OP. But yeah, once per turn, when a Numenor hero model in this army calls heroic action within 6 inches of Elendur, roll a d6. On a 5+, no might is expended, the might's effectively free. So basically once per turn, he'll have a chance of giving you a free might. Now, you could mess around with the numbers a bit. You could change this to 3 inches if it was OP, or 6+ if it was really OP. Alternatively, if it was on the weaker side, you could say a 4+, or it could happen more than once per turn. I'm just slightly inclined with all of these to make them on the slightly weaker side, just to make sure this, you know, isn't a game-breaking list, because Numenor and Rivendell as a pair are already very strong, and I don't want to throw too much extra in there to push them over the edge. So, the final model, and I think a few people probably would have seen this one coming, is sort of a slightly different option for Numenor. I've opted not to give them cavalry. I think you could give them cavalry. I think that would be completely legitimate. Basically, I've just given them a slightly more elite option, more in line with what you'd see from the Rohan Royal Guards or the Fountain Court Guard or something like that. And they have a very similar stat line to those. Fight 4, Strength 4, D6. Pretty common. Courage 4, which is quite nice. And then they just get a nice little bonus. If they're within 3 inches of a Numenor hero, this can reroll between rolls of 1. Originally, it was +1 to wound. I think that might be okay, but it might also be just a little bit on the powerful side with that Strength 4. So yeah, this is the version of them. And the idea would be you have a few smattered in there just to support your Numenor heroes, especially actually if you're supporting them in combat, because then they would get that +1 to wound roll as well as supporting that hero in combat. Now moving on to the evil models. This was really hard to do because there's very, very little written about these. I've just tried to create something that would represent like the minions of Sauron being sent forward before he emerges himself later on. So this is the Lieutenant of Barad Dur, and he's basically designed to be like quite a big leader of an army in the absence of Sauron for this list. So he actually has quite similar to an Uruk-hai captain stat line with a little bit more defense. Loses out on a wound. You probably spot some similarities with Lurtz, that kind of idea. He gets strike and march, which I thought was probably pretty fair. He's terror, and he gets the rule, the Will of Sauron. If he has will points remaining, he gets resistant to magic. Basically just to represent, you know, Sauron sent these guys forward and would likely be sort of keeping an eye on them and giving them sort of some level of resistance to the magic being cast at them from their enemies. The final one, there is a lot of mention throughout Tolkien's work about Sauron and werewolves, and I thought the only real option I could find for a sort of themey way to add more elite troop was putting in something called the Dread Wolf that he might send forward from Barad Dur. Now they only move 8 inches. Originally they moved 10. I felt that might be slightly too good with the stat line that they have here, so in order to keep it in line, and the fact they may be a bit bulkier and a bit heavier, they might be a little bit slower, so they're only a move of 8. But they're broadly based on the half troll stat line, so fight 5, strength 5, d5, 2 attacks, 2 wounds, courage 3, and they come with terror. So very similar to the half trolls, 1 less defense but a bit more movement, which you pay the price for. But yeah, that would just add a little bit of hitting power to your flanks maybe, and some nice fight 5 to get in on the side and wipe out some of those troops with some trapping manoeuvres. Well, hopefully those make sense. I will say a lot of this has come from unfinished works and things like that, so it's not hard canon. I've just done sort of the best I can with the information I had available, and hopefully these are all sort of quite themey and fit together. But if you do have any suggestions, drop them in the comments below. I'd be happy to have a look through those. Looking forward to seeing you for the next video where we start to introduce the Legendary Legions, which is where it starts to get, a bit more interesting beyond these profiles. You start to see how they fit into what I've designed. But yeah, thank you for listening, and yeah, looking forward to seeing you for the next video where we start to go into some of those Legendary Legions. Thanks, guys.